han sido programadas dentro del marco de un gran proyecto que en particular ha financiado en un acuerdo muy interesante, entre otras entidades, la Secretaría de Energía. Y tenemos el gusto también entonces de tener aquí a Germán Bucay, Fondo de Sustentabilidad, quien nos va a dar algunas palabras antes de presentar a nuestro ponente. Por favor.
Gracias, doctor. Hola, buenas tardes a todos. Germán Bucay Vasconcelos. Quiero dar la bienvenida a todos y en especial al profesor Horne. En nombre del Secretario de Energía y Secretario de Planeación Energética y Distribución, Leonardo Beltrán, tenemos el gusto de dar esta plática, que es parte del ciclo de conferencias de temas energéticos de interés. Y nada más quería decir que el profesor Horne va a hablar 30 minutos y luego vamos a tener por lo menos media hora de cuántas preguntas tengan, pero los invito a que vayan pensando en preguntas y que no les dé pena aprovechar el tiempo aquí con la personalidad que tenemos, ¿no? Entonces, sin más, dejo el que voy a presentar a nuestro. Gracias a todos.
Bueno, pues gracias otra vez. Y habrá que decir que el doctor Roland Horne se graduó en Ingeniería en 1972 y hasta haciendo tuvo dos grados, uno en 1975 y otro en 1986 en la Universidad de Auckland, Nueva Zelanda. Actualmente él ocupa la cátedra Thomas H. Barrow de Ciencias de la Tierra, del Departamento de Ingeniería de Recursos Energéticos de la Universidad de Stanford, y es director del programa de Geotermia de Stanford también. Anteriormente fue jefe del Departamento de Ingeniería del Petróleo de Stanford de 1995 a 2006. Es conocido internacionalmente por su trabajo de interpretación de pruebas de pozos, optimización de la producción y análisis de trazas de yacimientos fracturados. Ha supervisado 37 estudiantes de doctorado y 120 maestría, un número de publicaciones muy notable en estas arbitradas y libros también. Él recibió el premio Lester C. Puren de la Sociedad de Ingenieros Petroleros, así como el premio John Frank Carr. Dr. Horne fue elegido miembro de la Academia Nacional de Ingeniería de los Estados Unidos en 2002 y en 2007 fue miembro honorario de la Sociedad de Ingenieros Petroleros. Él fue presidente también de la Asociación Internacional de Geotermia durante el periodo de 2013 y co-coordinador del programa técnico de los Congresos Mundiales de Geotermia del 2010 y lo será del 2015. Es profesor invitado de la Universidad de Petróleo, además ha sido profesor de la Universidad de Texas A&M y de la Universidad de Auckland en Nueva Zelanda y la Universidad Tecnológica en Malasia. Aquí está el título, no, aquí no está el título de su conferencia, que es el futuro de la energía, petróleo, geotermia y renovables. Es una pregunta. Y aquí la doctora Prol hizo favor de anotar que en esta presentación se examinará 3 aspectos. 1, recursos energéticos. 2, ecología. Y 3, recursos humanos. Tanto en los aspectos técnicos como los programas educativos tienen un papel importante en estos aspectos. Pues damos la bienvenida al doctor. Muchas gracias, Sam. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I'd like to begin with an apology because, unfortunately, I'm unable to speak Spanish more than to order dinner, and therefore I'm going to give my address this afternoon in English. So, the topic of my discussion this afternoon is geothermal energy, and I'd like to give a snapshot of where geothermal energy is in the world today, and perhaps some projection of where we may go into the future. So I'm divided my thoughts into 4 parts. Actually, I have a 5th part, which I'll leave out because of the time this afternoon. I'd like to talk about where we are collectively in the world today in geothermal energy. And in particular, I'd like to talk about what things are new in geothermal power plants over the last 10 or 15 years. I'll spend a small amount of time talking about direct geothermal heat pumps, and I'll end up with something more of a holistic projection by talking about in geothermal systems, which will be my fourth and final topic. So to begin, talk about where we are today. In the United States and countries of the world have a very strong expansion of renewable energy for electricity generation. This graph shows the United States, but the same image could be reflected in countries. So important to what you see here, this dark blue is the actual production of renewable electricity in the United States. And what's clear here is that hydropower is going down and renewable power is up. In fact, those two lines have just about met in 2014 to be the same. However, and of course, geothermal is lifted by the same water that raises all of those renewable boats. All renewable energies, however, are not alike. And one of the important characteristics of geothermal energy in comparison to wind and solar, for example, and many others too, is that it's base load. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And it's almost unique in that regard. The only other exception in biomass, which is largely the burning of wood, waste product agriculture. It's not a very high-tech operation at all. And therefore, geothermal and biomass actually are one of the most useful prospects for the substitution of fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas. What you see here too is nuclear. So if we are to have large amounts of solar and wind in order to substitute on the occasions when it's not blowing and the sun's not shining, if we are going to have an energy that is renewable, geothermal is one of the few ways by biomass being the only other. In addition, if we look at the emissions, carbon and carbon dioxide of the different sources, it's clear that fossil fuels, coal and gas are prominent emitters of carbon dioxide. When we look at the renewable sources, they have much lower figures. Nuclear is also very low. But you can see here geothermal among the lowest. The only lower one, wind. Some people, when I showed the slide, are surprised that solar has such a significant carbon emission. And that's principally during manufacturing. It does not have any emissions during operation. Now, in the introduction, I heard that I was involved in the World Geothermal Congress 2005 and 15. Geothermal Congress of Geothermal Olympics takes place every 5 years. And one of the functions of the World Geothermal Congress is to conduct an inventory of geothermal resources of the planet. So in 2005, this was the actual accounting of the total energy production from geothermal worldwide. And importantly, what you see here is in 2005, this was the projection of what would be produced in 2010. And if you can't read that number, it says 10,738 megawatts. Remember this number, 10,738. That was in 2005. In 2010, the inventory was conducted again, and what was actually produced in 2010 was 10,715. So we were short by 23 megawatts. But overall, what you can see is that geothermal energy met its projections between the years of 2005 and 2010. And just in passing, let's draw your attention to this figure also. The direct use of geothermal for heat, process heat, and other uses was actually much larger than that, about 5 times larger. I'll come back to that later. If we look then in 2010, what was the projection for 2015? These are actual numbers, and this projection. The projection was that we would have 8,500 watts by 2015. Actually, on this occasion, will probably not our promise, principally as a function of the world financial crisis in 2009, which has given pause to many geothermal projects. Nonetheless, the expansion has continued. So you can see this is the latest figure that I have, 11,200 megawatts in 2012. I don't have the numbers, but between 2012 and 2013, the United States has increased its production of geothermal energy, or its capacity, by 5%. So these are big amounts of increase from one year to the next. And important, in the U.S., we have at this month 147 geothermal projects under development. And most importantly, you see the dark blue part of this curve, 106 projects that are under development in places where no development took place before. So this is not just, you know, rearranging furniture. This is actually adding new rooms to the house. This part here is furniture. And this is one of my favorite slides. If you ignore everything else in my talk, please pay attention to this. In 2010, most recent figures that have available, this represents not capacity but actual production of electricity. The state of California, the state of Nevada, in gigawatt hours. So total generation in California was 204,000 gigawatt hours, of which 28.8%, almost 30%, was from renewable sources. Renewable including hydroelectric. Hydroelectric is about half of that, 6%. But what you'll see in here is that the largest non-hydro contribution to electric production in the state of California was from geothermal, representing 6% of all electricity generated in the state. Also, rather importantly, the state of Nevada, which is smaller over generation, nonetheless also has about 6% of its total electrical generation from geothermal sources. Now, California and Nevada are very different places for many different reasons, politically, socially, but also from geothermal point of view too. California is a rather old state for geothermal development. It's high entropy resources, and they've been in development for 40 years. Nevada has medium to low entropy resources, and most of them are newly developed. And the reason I point that out is because this represents kind of the future for many other regions of the world. The quality of resources in the state of Nevada are modest at best. They have resource temperatures of 150 degrees that would have been ignored in California up until recent times. So when we look at what the state of Nevada has, this in fact is a far more remarkable figure than California. The totals are the same. California made a lot of money using gold, but Nevada, more impressively, made their money using silver or brass. And if we look at the impact, this may be less visible, I'll point it out to you. If you see the website down here at the bottom, ISO.com, California Independent Service Operator, they're the ones who dispatch electricity in the state. And what you can see is that this is, the yellow line here is solar. This, on any day, on any hour, you look up that website, see exactly what the state of California is generating at the moment. This is the renewables graph, and on this particular day, I made this slide, this presentation, so this was July, about a month ago. At lunchtime, total generation in the state was 33 gigawatts, 7.5 gigawatts was renewable sources, not including hydro. So this is 22%, not including hydro, and I find that hydro is about 60% more than that. So here is solar, the line pointed out, which might not be so visible. Solar on that day, this lunch, of course, midday, was generating about 4 gigawatts. Wind, somewhat less. In California, it blows at night more than in the day. So full of the day, not much. here is geothermal. So geothermal is strong, continuous baseload power underpins the renewable production of the state. And last year, in the State of the Union address, President Barack Obama showed this slide. And because I'm a taxpayer, I felt it was acceptable for me to borrow his slide, show it to you. And what this shows is the expansion of renewable electricity generation in the nation between 2008 and 2012. What you can see here, this is wind and geothermal and solar. So what's important about this slide is not the numbers, but the fact that the President of the United States actually understands the word geothermal. And this was politically very important to us. We thought at the time that it was the first president who understood geothermal, but actually we were wrong, because President Ronald Reagan said this in 1974 when he was the governor of the state of California. And in fact, this statement and policies followed from it were largely responsible for the expansion of the geothermal resources of California in the 1970s during the first and second oil shocks. And looking further forward, not just past but to the future, you can see that the projections by the U.S. Department of Energy is that geothermal, this brown line here, are expected to continue to have increasing contributions to the renewable production of the nation forward for the next years. You'll notice importantly that geothermal resource exceeds solar by a factor of 2, not as much wind or biomass. Now, I've been talking about the United States. That's where I'm from recently, but further back in my history, I came from New Zealand, so let's talk about New Zealand too. New Zealand is a nation which has historically produced a lot of energy from geothermal sources, and in this purple bar at the bottom, you can see the geothermal. New Zealand is also blessed with very prolific amounts of hydroelectric power, and the yellow line in here is natural gas. Natural gas actually represents a significant pause in geothermal development in New Zealand. Back in the 1970s, the gas was discovered here. The gas was cheap compared to the geothermal, and furthermore, the development of the gas politically required a redirection investment. So gas was bad news for geothermal in New Zealand, except recently, it turns out that gas is sort of running out. So what the nation of New Zealand intends to do, this is a messy graph, but I insert because projection, this is the current rate here. The projection is that the gas is going to drop precipitously. This is 2016 to 10% of overall production. And the nation of New Zealand is expected to have approximately 1/4 of all of its electricity generated from geothermal sources in 2016. And it is, in fact, on track to achieve that in 2014. That's not the only place where geothermal is important. Another significant one is Iceland. This is not electricity, but all primary energy. That includes transportation fuels, and what's important significantly in Iceland is boats. Fishing boats are the consumer of oil. And what you can see here in terms of percentages, geothermal represents more than 2/3 of all energy consumed in the nation of Iceland, and hydro makes up another 1/4. So between them, they represent almost 80% of all energy consumed in the nation. They're not also ones either. Importantly, I point out, in spite of the slowdown of the world economic crisis, this is a geothermal plant in Indonesia, Ulu Bulu, which is a 110 megawatt plant installed, became operational in October of 2012. Also in Kenya, they're in the process of bringing online new power plant, actually close to this, to achieve 560 megawatts, again by 2016. The reason why 560 megawatts is important is that about half produced in Mexico, but the nation of Kenya has in total 1,400 megawatts. That's complete production in the nation. 560 megawatts represents more than 1/3 of the total electric grid. So 5,000 megawatts is their prediction by 2030. What that represents is that the nation of Kenya intends to industrialize its economy almost completely with geothermal energy, which is an indigenous resource that it has when it has largely no other. If we look at the top 10 producers nationwide, it's Mexico here in yellow. Mexico is number 4, behind the USA, Philippines, Indonesia. And what's interesting about this graph data from 2010 are the places where action is taking place. So you can see here that between 2005 and 2000, Indonesia increased its capacity by more than half. Iceland increased its capacity by more than double, and Kenya also here 1/3 added. So there are nations of the world who are making substantial advances in their economy using geothermal energy. All right, so that was where we are today. Let's talk about how we can forward. For many years, geothermal power plants looked very similar technically. And typical, I'll talk about this number right here. Typical geothermal power plant for the last 40, 50 years has a specific steam consumption in this range, 8 to 10 kilograms per kilowatt hour of generated electricity. Over the last 10 years, however, or 15 years, we have a lot of innovation, technical innovation in power plants themselves, using, for example, combined cycle plants that are hybrids of geothermal and other sources, or at the moment, and a much more significant range of inlet pressure. Most of the old plants have more or less the same design. And in some examples, have steam consumptions down as low as 5 kilograms per kilowatt hour to 8 to 10 previously. So they're more than, or almost twice as efficient. And there are interesting things going on in the geothermal world. One of them is the hybridization of geothermal with other sources of energy. And this is an example from El Salvador, where they solar thermal collectors to increase the thermal input to the power plant. They have insufficient kilojoules entering their plant, so they are increasing the input using solar troughs. They add it in 2 different places, one flashing the separated water, another one after the second stage of separation. And this is the second example. This is a geothermal solar photovoltaic hybrid plant in Nevada. So this is a conventional binary geothermal plant, 46 megawatts. And one of the advantages of geothermal development is that typically they have a lot of space because of the size of the well field. And so what they did at this plant, which is this place called Stillwater, is they added 24 megawatts photovoltaic panels. You see them all surrounding the binary plant. And that has a specific advantage because binary power plants tend to be inefficient when the atmospheric temperature is high. They're obliged to use air-cooled condensers rather than water, wet cooling towers. And therefore, in the afternoon at 3 o'clock, the temperature is hottest, the power plant has lowest output because that's where the efficiency is least. And that, of course, is not ideal. Because 3 o'clock in the afternoon, especially in Nevada, that's when it gets hot. Everybody turns on their air conditioning, and that's when the actual electricity demand is greatest. That corresponds to the maximum output from the photovoltaic panel. And therefore, the photovoltaic fill the gap that the reduction of capacity from exchanges actually represents. And this particular plant, Stillwater plant, has still further innovation taking place. At this moment, they are building another 17 megawatts of solar hybridization, but very much like what I showed from El Salvador. These are not photovoltaics, but concentrating solar systems. So these are units that are adding into the overall heat capacity. The photovoltaics will not dynamically connect to the binary geothermal plant, but the solar thermal will be. All right, so that's the innovation taking place in power plants. Let me talk about direct use. So there are many applications of geothermal energy that don't involve electricity at all, and that's listed here. I'm going to talk about some of them. Draw your attention at the bottom to geothermal pumps. Now that's something that will come up in just a moment. One of the more famous ones is balneology. Balneology, one of my favorites. This is something that people enjoy throughout the world, bathing in hot pools. And in fact, in many countries, that's the largest application of geothermal energy, particularly in Japan. In space, I draw your attention to the comparison. This is the city of Reykjavik in the 1930s, when it was largely heated. Reykjavik is really cold. And in the 1930s, the city was heated by burning coal, of which there is none in Iceland, so it was all imported from Norway or Sweden. And in addition to the detriment of their economics, they also have the smog. This is Reykjavik today. It's fully heat. All of the buildings, the houses, the offices, everything are heated with geothermal direct heat. There is no smog anymore in the city of Reykjavik. And in fact, 8% of the population of Iceland is reached by direct application, which doesn't seem a lot, except when you look at population of Iceland, 300,000 people, 200,000 of them live in the city of Reykjavik, but the rest of them live very small villages and farms and things like that, in spite of which they are still reached by geothermal reticulation of hot water. And worldwide, what you see, this is the overall capacity of things like swimming and bathing is the second largest. These ones here are space heating nets for buildings and houses and whatever. The big operation is geothermal heat pumps. Geothermal heat pumps, for those who are not familiar with what they are, they're like the exhibition you have on the wall of your office, if you have an one, except instead of having air-cooled sensor on the outside, sensor actually underground and uses the thermal capacity of the ground rather than the thermal capacity of the air. It's massively more efficient, uses a lot less energy. Let's skip over that one. And in terms of the direct use application, this comes here as number one. So these are figures from 95, 2000, 2005, 2010. And what you can see here is a dramatic increase over those increments of 5 years to a total of very large energy per year being applied with thermal heat pumps. And if we look worldwide, somewhat surprisingly, the largest user of direct geothermal heat is China, principally in district heat, but also in hot as well. The United States with geothermal heat pumps, but the most remarkable of all, the third largest direct geothermal heat user of the planet is Sweden. Who imagines Sweden as a geothermal country? They have no volcanoes, they have no hot springs, and yet they are prominently using geothermal heat pumps. It's cold in Sweden too. And you can see some other nations, rather surprising, is Germany, Switzerland, and many European countries gaining most of that from heat pumps. Heat pumps are like free money. You expend 1 kilowatt for heat pump and receive 4 kilowatts of exchange. It's almost miraculous device. And let me show you this. This is Stanford University campus. And Stanford University is at this moment constructing or replacing its entire infrastructure for the campus. And our campus is rather smaller than UNAM, but it's anyway quite big. And at the moment, we have a 30 megawatt cogeneration facility that generates electricity, 30 megawatts of electricity with natural gas. And the waste heat from the combined cycle turbines is used to heat the campus and also cool it during the summertime. All of that is surplus, and instead, campus is going to be cooled using heat pumps. And to show you how that works, each building on campus actually receives both hot and cold water. The cooling and heating are imbalanced, roughly imbalanced with each other over a period of the year. And what that means is those heat pumps will take the chilled water, which is circulated to the buildings, it returns somewhat warmer, and it will take hot water circulated to the buildings, cooler, and heat pumps will be used to change the heat from the returned cooled water to the returned hot water. It takes the energy out of what comes back and sends it back out to the again. So on average over the year they're in balance, but winter and summer are not the same. During the winter time the thermal requirement is greater. The red part of the cycle is the burning of natural gas in boilers to heat the water before it goes back. And blue is energy which is expended in cooling towers in order to campus cool. So a cooling tower is a device which is designed and constructed to waste energy. That's its purpose. And therefore, in the design of the campus-wide system, this blue and the red are going to be exchanged with each other using geothermal heat pumps. So during the winter time, the energy will be extracted from the ground, and during the summertime, the energy is put back into the ground, but basically it's over a 6-month period instead of a day-by-day period. So the campus will become completely carbon independent, and it will be fueled completely by renewable electricity. Coming back to geothermal again, if we look at how much energy is being consumed from direct use, it's a very large amount, and a very much greater number than are generating electricity. And importantly, if you look at who is doing what, as I said before, Iceland, 89% of all of the living space for human-occupied spaces heated with geothermal. In Turkey, 30%. Importantly, there are more than 1,000 spas and resorts that use geothermal energy, representing 15 million people per year who use it. Switzerland has 6,000 geothermal heat pumps. Population of Switzerland is about 4 million. So that's roughly 1 per square kilometer of the overall country. The United States has more than 1 million geothermal heat pump applications, mostly in the eastern side of the nation. And it's been growing at 12% over the last 10 years, so very rapidly. Okay, so let me move to my fourth final topic, sort of looking a bit more in the future. People who are familiar with geothermal may reasonably observe. We have, for the most part, developed many of the good resources that are available on the planet. There are some exceptions that I pointed out. Indonesia has many high entropy resources left, as does Iceland, does also have. We will find new high temperature resources in many different countries, but it's certainly true that good ones have been grabbed already. So therefore, if we are going to expand geothermal energy in places that are not so well endowed with high temperature resources, then we need to do something else. And the concept of enhanced geothermal systems is to provide or to create a geothermal resource where none exists naturally. If we have a place where the rock is hot, which is the place in many different regions at drillable depth, but which does not have permeability or which does not have water, we can create our permeability using hydraulic fracturing, and we can introduce water where there may have been none. So the idea is to drill a succession or a pair of wells or a number of wells, produce hydraulic fractures in the subsurface, and circulate the water through those hydraulic fractures for basically heat exchange at a kind of depth between 3 and 5 kilometers. And if we look at the United States, at the temperatures that are available at drillable depth, at 6 kilometer depth, you can see here basically all of the colors, the orange and warmer, represent kind of temperatures that are being used in geothermal resources today, in conventional geothermal resources. So most of the west states, as well as some of the Gulf Coast states. If we look at the temperatures that are used for binary resources in Nevada, go down there to 50 degrees, which is then introducing many of the plain states, as well as some of the northeastern states as well. Now, let me be honest. The technology for enhanced geothermal is not yet completely in hand. And a lot of the research takes place in universities like mine, as well as in many others as well, are addressing the technological difficulties to achieve widespread enhanced geothermal systems. There are several requirements that are difficult for us. One of them is to achieve sufficient surface to volume ratio, because heat conduction is a very poor method of energy transfer. So if you want to gain a lot of energy, you must have contact with a large volume of rock. And that requires understanding and control technology of hydraulic fracture. You need to be able to put hydraulic fracture in a configuration that is advantageous to us. Otherwise, what happens is that the fluid tends to short circuit through principal fractures, and therefore we have insufficient volume connected, and the process doesn't work. Another issue is the attainment of flow rates that are economically attractive. A conventional geothermal well is typically able to produce between 80 and 100 kilograms per second. And for those of you thinking in oil and gas, 80 kilograms per second is roughly 50,000 barrels per day. We do have oil wells that produce 50,000 barrels per day, but we don't have many of them. A geothermal well that doesn't produce 50,000 barrels per day is basically a money loser. Geothermal wells have a lot of fluid because the energy concentration of hot water or steam is much less than the concentration of hydrocarbons. So 80 kilograms per second target for an example geothermal well. And finally, we have something of a political or a social barrier, which is the fear, not just the fear, but the actuality of induced seismicity. Fracturing in geothermal operations has caused earthquakes in Switzerland and in several other places. And those earthquakes have concerned to people who live there. They don't like them, and therefore they objected to geothermal projects. Famously, the project Basel, Switzerland was abandoned as a consequence of public opinion following a 0.5 earthquake in the city of Basel. Now, those of you who live next to the city will laugh. 3.5 earthquakes every day. You know, we have them in California too. But In Basel, they didn't have 3.5 earthquakes before, and 3.5 earthquakes very upsetting. They live there. If we don't like this, we want it, stop this geothermal project. So unless we, the geothermal community, solve the issue of seismicity, it could mean the end of this technological idea. And that's the reason why research focuses on that. Let's talk about the 80 kilograms per second for a moment. This is an economic curve actually published in a rather famous report known as the MIT report in 2007. It was on the basis of this report that the U.S. government committed $400 million towards the development of EGS. And actually, the Australian government also committed a slightly small amount. But what this economic projection proposed was that there's 80 kilograms per second per well, then geothermal could achieve an electricity price of about 5 kilowatt hour. And the reason why, once the technology became mature, the installation of 100 to 200 total megawatts installed. And the reason the 5 kilowatt hour is a relative number is that is in competition with natural gas or wind, at least in 2007. So the 80 kilograms per second is what we want. Now, if we look at conventional geothermal wells, this is the kind of well that such as we have here in Mexico, in Cerro Prieto or Los Angeles. You can see this total production. This is a well which is producing about 7 kilograms per second. So it's completely reasonable in practice for natural geothermal systems to produce these kind of amounts. These are wells that are producing from geological environments where the reservoir rock itself has naturally occurring fractures. So we know that this is achievable. The question is, how do we produce fractures the way that Mother Nature fractures in order to be able to achieve this amount? That was a geothermal reservoir. If we look at some of the experimental EGS reservoirs, the story is a bit less encouraging. So this GPK3 is an enhanced geothermal well, France, in a place called Soult. And you can see here the actual production. Once they finished the simulation, the stable production well was about 10 kilograms per second. If we look at another experimental enhanced geothermal system in Japan, this one, there's the production figure here. I think I pointed it out. This one was producing about 7 kilograms per second. In Australia, in a place called the Cooper Basin, right in the middle of Australia, they have a geothermal project which has been being developed for more than 10 years. They achieved 20 kilograms per second in 2005, and later, the same year, 30 kilograms per second. In November of 2012, they completed a fourth well basin, which ultimately 35 kilograms per second. And in May of 2013, they built a power plant on that site and generated 1 megawatt of electricity. So 1 megawatt of electricity is not a big amount. In fact, it's only just enough to basically run the pumps on that installation. But in terms of technological, what it means technologically is that they actually achieved 55 kilograms per second. They were halfway there to what we want to achieve in the future. And this is the actual power plant at Cooper Basin, which generated electricity last year. The encouraging part of the story, however, is in Europe, because this site here, a place called Landau in Germany, is a commercially operated enhanced geothermal system which began operation in 2007. It produces 3 megawatts of electricity from 2 wells, and they achieved a flow of 7 kilograms per second. So basically, they did it. They reduced the amount that is required. They actually were able to do more, but they didn't because of the fear of earthquakes. The difficulty was not production of the water, but injection. And one of the things that you notice, you won't be able to see this graph, but I'll point out the volatile parts. This is 200 degrees centigrade and 100 degrees centigrade. The black line that you can see is salt, one I showed you before. Landau actually finishes right here at 150 degrees centigrade. The reason that's important is Landau at 150 degrees centigrade at 2.5 kilometers depth, whereas salt drilled all the way 5 kilometers. And as you may easily imagine, drilling cost is almost exponential depth. The cost of this well is massively more than the cost of these ones. These were relatively cheap. And Landau is a commercially operating power plant. They make money. That makes money. There is also a second one, and the second one which is already in operation, and a third one, which is under development now. Salt, the one I mentioned before, actually the border between France and Germany lies between these plants. Salt, France, Landau in China, Friedrichshafen are in Germany. So these are the numbers. Landau is 3 megawatts electricity and thermal district heating. Insheim is 5 megawatts of electricity and also an amount that I'm not quite certain of for district heating. In Rittelshofen, it's district heating, no electricity for. In the United States, we have several geothermal projects conducted over the last 5 years. Not all of them successful, but most of them with some good results. The only kind of true enhanced geothermal system type that I showed you in Landau, this one at the top, which is the Newbury project in Oregon, and they have already done the first fracture simulation, and they are about to do their second well. So that project is in operation. These other ones were largely simulating the sides of conventional geothermal reservoirs. Overall, if we put all of this together, we're close. In 2010, this last inventory was actually conducted. If we compare the amount of energy that was produced worldwide and the amount of carbon emissions that were avoided in place of burning fossil fuels, the total amount of energy, here you can see the equivalent of 239 barrels of oil, which is about 3 days of consumption. So the planet as a whole avoided 3 days of oil production, and they also avoided 32 million tons of carbon or 100 million tons of CO2. So let me draw this to a conclusion. In the last 10 years, 2005, the world has seen very rapid blossoming of geothermal development, largely because of the high oil price, but also because of the commitment of nations and people in general to low carbon futures. There are quite many countries that have developed and used geothermal energy for the first time, and a lot of new companies that did previously work in the sector have joined the community. I pointed out several technologies that have been applied, hybrid plants, combined cycle plants, that have much higher efficiency than ones that have been used before. Heat pumps, I pointed out how important those are. Pumps are usable practically everywhere. Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, places where we don't see high temperatures in the subsurface. Even the campus of Stanford University was using heat pumps in a significant way. In the end, if we expect a widespread future for geothermal going forward, we must have enhanced geothermal systems if we're going to grow kind of figures I showed for the state of California and Nevada. California and Nevada are richly endowed with high-temperature geothermal resources, as is Mexico, at least in part. If, however, we want to develop resources close to population centers, places that are not volcanically attractive, must do enhanced thermal systems. I've pointed out the steps that are required for that. The control design of practice systems, as well as characterization practices once you've created them. That's the kind of research universities and national labs are conducting right now. That's the focus of my research at the university, as well as that places. For those of you, there are many here in the room who are young and energetic in spirit as well as intellect. This is a problem that's yet to be solved. This is a problem in which your generation hopefully will solve, bringing this kind of very attractive resource into use for the benefit of more people in the world. So with that, let's conclude and invite your questions. Thank you very much.